Chapter 1. The Invitation. Lady Eleanor Drake sat by the window of her small London flat, watching the rain streak down the glass. The streets below were grey and wet, umbrellas bobbing past like black mushrooms. She sipped her tea, enjoying the quiet, when there came a sharp knock at her door. A boy in a postman's cap stood outside, holding a cream-coloured envelope. "Special delivery, ma'am," he said. Eleanor thanked him, shut the door, and broke the seal. Inside was a heavy card with gold lettering. "Sir Reginald Marlowe requests the pleasure of your company at Marlowe House this weekend." She raised an eyebrow. She hadn't seen Sir Reginald in nearly 2 years, not since she had helped the police untangle a rather messy situation involving one of his business rivals. Their paths crossed now and then in London society, but a personal invitation? That was unusual. The note was signed in his bold, heavy handwriting. Beneath it, in smaller letters, was a curious line. "I have important news to share and I believe you'll want to hear it." Eleanor read it twice. Important news? And why invite her, of all people, to a family gathering? She glanced back at the card. The date was this very Friday, just 2 days away. There was no mention of what the news might be. Well, she murmured to herself, either Sir Reginald has taken up the habit of social calls, or trouble is brewing. 2 days later, Eleanor's car rattled down a narrow country road. The November sky hung low and dark, heavy with the promise of rain. Far ahead, perched on a rise, stood Marlowe House, a great, greystone manor with tall windows like watchful eyes. By the time she reached the gates, the wind was picking up. A uniformed butler opened the heavy front door, his face polite but distant. Inside, the entrance hall was warm and bright. The smell of wood polish mixed with the faint scent of roses. Voices echoed from a nearby drawing room, and Eleanor could already hear laughter, the strained sort people use when they don't much like each other. She stepped into the drawing room and took stock of the gathering. Lady Agatha Marlowe, Sir Reginald's wife, stood near the fireplace in a deep green gown. She smiled when she saw Eleanor, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. Charles Marlowe, the son, lounged in a chair with a glass in hand. His dark hair was rumpled, his gaze sharp and restless. Violet Sinclair, slim and graceful, sat beside Lady Agatha, watching the room with quiet interest. Dr. Percival Grant, the family physician, stood by the drinks cabinet, carefully pouring himself a sherry. And finally, Inspector Bernard Holt, in plain clothes, not his uniform, was speaking with Sir Reginald near the far window. Sir Reginald broke off his conversation and came forward. He was a tall man, broad in the shoulders, with a neat moustache and a firm handshake. "Lady Eleanor, I'm so pleased you could come," he said. "You were rather mysterious in your invitation," she replied, smiling. "All in good time," he said. "We'll speak more over dinner. For now, make yourself comfortable. The storm will keep us indoors, I'm afraid." As if to prove his point, a gust of wind rattled the window panes. The fire snapped and crackled. Eleanor felt the eyes of the other guests on her, some curious, some cold. She had the odd feeling that this weekend would be anything but ordinary. Chapter 2. The guests arrive. The rain began just after tea. By the time the last guest arrived, the wind was howling down the chimneys, and the windows shook in their frames. The butler moved about quietly, closing heavy curtains and checking the fireplaces. Eleanor stood near the front hall as a young maid hurried past, arms full of kindling. "Evening, miss," the girl said shyly. "Evening," Eleanor replied. She noticed the girl's dress was worn and her shoes thin, not ideal for such weather. From the drawing room came a burst of laughter, sharp and short, as though someone had told a joke that wasn't funny. Eleanor stepped inside. Sir Reginald was pouring drinks for everyone. Lady Agatha stood beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Across the room, Charles lounged with one foot on a low table. Violet Sinclair sat nearby, pretending to read a book but glancing up at Charles whenever he spoke. Dr. Grant had taken a chair by the fire. His glasses glinted in the light as he leafed through the evening paper. Eleanor noticed that each time the wind rattled the windows, he flinched slightly, then went back to reading. Inspector Holt arrived last. His overcoat was soaked, his hat dripping with rain. "Storm's coming in hard," he said, handing his coat to the butler. "Road out of here may not be passable by morning." "That's not a problem," Sir Reginald said cheerfully. "We'll enjoy a quiet weekend together. No interruptions." But Eleanor noticed Lady Agatha glance quickly at her son, and Charles' smirk fade for just a moment. Later, the guests gathered for a light supper. The dining room was long and grand, lit by a chandelier that swayed ever so slightly with the wind. Outside, rain hammered against the glass. Charles was in high spirits, too high, Eleanor thought, telling stories about his travels. "Monte Carlo, now that's a place," he said. "The cards, the music, the sea air. And the company." He winked at Violet, who colored slightly and looked away. Lady Agatha interrupted. "Not all of us care to hear about gambling tables, Charles. It's only a bit of fun, Mother." Sir Reginald's smile was thin. "Fun can be costly." The room went quiet for a moment before Violet politely changed the subject to the roses in the garden. After supper, the group moved to the library. The storm showed no sign of letting up. Lightning flashed against the windows, followed by a deep roll of thunder. Sir Reginald stood near the fire, staring into the flames. "Tomorrow," he said at last, "I will have an announcement. Something that concerns everyone here." Eleanor's eyes moved around the room. She saw curiosity on Violet's face, worry on Lady Agatha's, and a flicker of anger on Charles. Dr. Grant's expression was unreadable, but Inspector Holt watched Sir Reginald with sharp attention. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind roared. Eleanor felt it again, that quiet, uneasy hum in the air. The kind that came just before something happened. Chapter 3, A Strange Evening. After supper, the group lingered in the library. The shelves rose high, full of leather-bound books and the faint smell of dust. Lightning flashed again, bright enough to show the patterns in the carpet. Sir Reginald stood near the mantel, speaking quietly with Inspector Holt. Their voices were too low to hear, but Eleanor noticed Holt's brow furrow and Sir Reginald's jaw tighten. Lady Agatha poured herself a small glass of sherry and drifted toward Violet Sinclair, who sat near the window. Eleanor caught only a few words. "Must be done. Before he changes his mind." She looked down quickly at her own book, pretending not to listen. A little later, Charles slipped out of the room. Eleanor followed a moment afterward, meaning to stretch her legs. She found him in the hallway, speaking in hushed tones to the young maid. "You'll get it tonight," he said. "Just be sure no one sees." The maid looked nervous. Don't think," Charles cut in, pressing something into her hand. When they noticed Eleanor, Charles grinned. "Evening stroll, Lady Drake?" "Just stretching my legs," she said lightly. She noted the maid slipping away toward the back stairs. Back in the library, Violet was gone. A faint creak came from the door to the study, which was slightly ajar. Eleanor stepped closer and saw Violet rifling through a desk drawer. Violet looked up, startled. "Oh, I was looking for writing paper. Lady Agatha asked me to write to her sister." Eleanor smiled politely. "I'm sure the butler could have provided that." Violet's cheeks flushed. She closed the drawer a little too quickly and brushed past her without meeting her eyes. By 9 o'clock, the storm was rattling the entire house. The wind moaned in the chimneys, and the rain hit the windows like thrown pebbles. Sir Reginald clapped his hands. "Enough for tonight. We'll all be up early. Big day tomorrow." Eleanor met his eyes. There was something in them, a mixture of excitement and caution, as if he were bracing himself for whatever tomorrow would bring. She went upstairs to her guest room, the corridor dimly lit by wall lamps. Somewhere down the hall, a door closed softly. The sound was almost lost under the groan of the wind, but it made her pause. She had the feeling the real conversations at Marlowe House were happening when no one was supposed to be watching. Chapter 4, Dinner Tensions. The next evening, the dining room glowed with candlelight. The chandelier above swayed ever so slightly as the wind pushed at the manor's heavy walls. The long table was set with polished silver and crystal glasses that sparkled in the flickering light. Eleanor took her seat between Violet and Dr. Grant. Across from her, Charles leaned back in his chair, already halfway through his first glass of wine. Dinner began pleasantly enough, a warm soup, then roasted duck with vegetables from the garden. But beneath the small talk, Eleanor felt the edges of something sharp. "So, Eleanor," Charles said with a grin, "I hear you have a talent for solving problems." "Only when people ask me to," she replied. "Let's hope no one here needs your help," Lady Agatha said, her tone smooth but cool. Sir Reginald's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Help is always needed, Agatha, when the truth is involved." Lady Agatha's smile thinned. Violet kept her eyes on her plate, cutting her duck into neat, tiny pieces. Dr. Grant cleared his throat. "Sir Reginald, I've brought along the papers you asked for. Perhaps we might review them after." "That will keep until morning," Sir Reginald interrupted. "In fact, everything will be settled in the morning." Charles gave a short laugh. "Another one of your grand announcements. Can't you ever just have dinner without turning it into a business meeting?" "This concerns the family," Sir Reginald said, his voice calm but firm. "Then I suppose I'm still part of it," Charles replied, his smile too wide. The air seemed to grow heavier. Eleanor noticed Violet's hands tighten around her fork. Inspector Holt, at the far end of the table, was watching Sir Reginald closely. When dessert was served, a rich plum pudding, the storm outside reached its peak. Rain pounded the windows. Thunder rolled across the hills. Sir Reginald raised his glass. "Tomorrow morning, after breakfast, I will share my decision. It will change the future of this house." A candle flickered wildly, throwing shadows across his face. No one spoke for a moment. Then Charles set his glass down with a sharp click. "Well," he said, "I can hardly wait." That night, as the guests left the table, Eleanor felt certain of one thing. Whatever Sir Reginald planned to announce, someone in this house was not going to like it. Chapter 5: Nighttime Noises. By 10 o'clock, the storm had grown fierce. The wind howled through the chimneys, rattling the windows and shaking the doors. Rain lashed the stone walls, making the old manor groan as if it were alive. Eleanor sat in her guest room, a small lamp casting soft light across her suitcase. She had just finished a book when a sudden thump echoed through the hallway. Her heart jumped. "Probably just a shutter," she murmured. But the sound had been sharp, deliberate, not like the usual creaks of an old house. She got up and moved quietly to the door, listening. Down the hall, she could hear soft footsteps, someone walking lightly on the carpet. A door closed somewhere with a soft click. Curiosity pulled her forward. She crept to the end of the hall, near the study. Lightning flashed, revealing the tall, polished door. It was shut, but a faint light shone from the cracks at the bottom. Eleanor leaned closer. She thought she heard a voice, low, tense, then silence. Meanwhile, in the library, Lady Agatha wandered about in her dressing gown, fidgeting with the curtains. She paused by the study door, as if listening. Eleanor caught the movement from the hallway. Lady Agatha's face was pale, her lips pressed together. Then she walked away without a word. Upstairs, Charles moved as well, slipping silently past Eleanor's room. She wondered what he was doing, but didn't follow. Violet was nowhere to be seen. The storm drowned out most sounds, but Eleanor could still hear one faint noise, a thump, heavy, coming from the study. She froze. The house seemed to hold its breath. Another thump, followed by a dragging sound, faint but distinct. Eleanor returned to her room, heart pounding. She lay in bed, pulling the covers tight around her. Somewhere in the manor, Sir Reginald Marlowe was awake, or at least, someone was in his study. The wind rattled the windows. The storm raged on. And Eleanor knew, with a sinking feeling, that whatever was happening tonight would change everything. Chapter 6: The Body. Morning came grey and wet, the storm finally easing but leaving the grounds muddy and slippery. Eleanor awoke to the sound of low murmurs drifting from the hallway. She slipped on her slippers and went to the door. The other guests were gathered near the study. Charles looked pale. Lady Agatha was clutching her robe, her hands shaking. The butler stood stiffly, his face pale. "What's happened?" Eleanor asked. Sir Reginald's study door had been broken open. The lock had held overnight, but now the heavy door was swung wide. Inside, the room smelled faintly of brandy and smoke. And on the floor, slumped over the desk, was Sir Reginald Marlowe. He was still in his chair, head bent forward. A dark stain spread across his chest. His eyes stared blankly at the papers scattered across the desk. Eleanor gasped. "Hes. Dead." Inspector Holt stepped forward, examining the scene. "Yes," he said quietly. "Gunshot. Close range." Lady Agatha's face drained of color. "But the door. It was locked." "Exactly," Holt said. "The only key was in his pocket. No one could have locked it from the outside." Eleanor noticed the papers on the desk. One appeared to be a will, folded neatly but unsigned. A half-empty glass of brandy sat next to his right hand. Charles rubbed his face. "This can't be happening. Not here, not now." Violet Sinclair stood silently in the corner, her hands pressed together. Even the usually calm Dr. Grant looked troubled, frowning at the scene. Eleanor stepped closer, her mind racing. The study was a small room, with the desk near the window, heavy curtains drawn. A faint smell of almonds lingered in the air. She wrinkled her nose. "That's cyanide," she whispered. Inspector Holt shook his head. "Or an attempt to confuse us." Either way, this wasn't simple. Eleanor's eyes moved around the room. Mud on the windowsill, a scrap of green silk clutched in Sir Reginald's hand, something someone had left behind, intentionally or not. She turned to the others. "No one leaves this room until we know what happened," she said firmly. And in that moment, Eleanor realized the weekend she had looked forward to was over. Marlowe House had become a house of secrets. Chapter 7, Clues and Lies. The morning air was cool and damp. Outside, puddles reflected the grey sky, and the storm had left the gardens muddy. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy with tension. Eleanor stood in the study, examining the scene. She knelt to inspect the desk. Papers were scattered, but one drew her attention: the unsigned will. Someone had been cut out entirely. Charles. She frowned. Next, her eyes fell on the scrap of green silk clutched in Sir Reginald's hand. "This was torn from someone's clothing," she murmured. She tucked it carefully into a small envelope in her pocket. Inspector Holt moved beside her. "Gunshot at close range," he said. "The room was locked. No weapon was found. And there's a faint smell of almonds, possible poison, but maybe just a trick." Eleanor nodded. "Someone wanted us to think multiple things at once. Misdirection." She began questioning the guests. Lady Agatha's hands shook. "I didn't know," she said. "I went to check the shutters last night. That's all." Charles crossed his arms. "I was in my room. Sleeping. I didn't hear anything unusual." Violet Sinclair bit her lip. I was organizing papers for Lady Agatha. I didn't go near the study." Dr. Grant shook his head. "I was in my room reviewing Sir Reginald's medical files. I heard nothing. Even the butler seemed tense. I went to check on the storm. I did not enter the study, sir." Eleanor listened carefully. Each statement sounded plausible, but some hesitated, some avoided eye contact. She noted each one mentally. Then she spotted something odd. Mud on the windowsill. The outside garden was too wet for anyone to have slipped through unnoticed. How had it gotten there? She also noticed the positioning of the glass. A half-empty brandy, placed too close to the edge. Someone might have staged it. Eleanor's mind raced. So many small details, but one truth, she whispered. The killer left a trail and also tried to confuse us. Inspector Holt looked at her. "You've got a knack for this, Lady Eleanor. But remember, in a locked room murder, nothing is ever as simple as it seems." Eleanor glanced around the room. Everyone was still standing in shock, but she could feel their secrets waiting to slip. And she knew, sooner or later, one of them would. Chapter 8, Red Herrings. By mid-morning, the guests had gathered in the drawing room. Eleanor, notebook in hand, began piecing together the puzzle, but already she could see how tricky it would be. Lady Agatha fidgeted with a brooch pinned to her dress. Eleanor noticed it looked slightly loose. "I found it in Emily's room," Lady Agatha explained, her voice tight. "She must have taken it." The housemaid, Emily, looked guilty but nervous. I needed the money. I didn't mean anything bad," she said. Eleanor made a note. This was personal, not connected to the murder. Then there was the question of the affair. Charles leaned close to Violet, whispering something that made her blush and glance nervously at Lady Agatha. I saw them, Eleanor thought. But she realized this could be a distraction. People often used scandals to hide darker deeds. Dr. Grant lingered near the fire, occasionally glancing toward the desk. He had seemed worried, but was it because of the murder or because he had something to hide about Sir Reginald's health? And Inspector Holt, usually composed, kept making notes in a small notebook. Was he following the investigation, or following one of the guests? Eleanor stood, looking at each face. There are many secrets here, she said aloud. Some are real. Some are meant to distract us. But the truth is one, and it will reveal itself. She went to the study again, inspecting the windowsill where mud had appeared. Whoever staged the scene had thought carefully, but there were small mistakes. Tiny, almost invisible, yet telling. Each guest had a motive, even if they weren't the killer. Money, revenge, fear, all of it could mislead her. And Eleanor knew the cleverest misdirection could hide the simplest truth. As the afternoon passed, Eleanor made a plan. She would watch, ask questions, and wait for someone to slip up. The killer had already made a mistake, she just had to find it. Chapter 9: The Trap. That evening, the storm had passed, but the manor was still damp and quiet. Eleanor gathered the guests in the drawing room, arranging them carefully so everyone could see each other. I've been thinking, she began, her voice calm, that the killer may have left behind something very small, a clue, almost invisible. Something they hoped we would miss. The guests exchanged uneasy glances. Charles smirked, though it didn't reach his eyes. Lady Agatha's hands were clasped tightly in front of her. Violet fidgeted with her necklace. Eleanor held up the small envelope. I found this in Sir Reginald's hand. She opened it carefully and showed them the green silk scrap. I believe this belongs to the person who committed the murder. Everyone leaned in. A few gasps came from the corners of the room. Now, Eleanor continued, I'd like each of you to recall where you were last night around 10 o'clock. Lady Agatha spoke first. I was checking the shutters, as I said. I heard nothing unusual. Charles shrugged. I was in my room, sleeping. Violet looked down at her hands. I was organizing papers. Dr. Grant had just his glasses. I was reviewing medical files in my room. Eleanor watched their faces carefully, noting every twitch, every hesitation. She had learned over the years that even the smallest sign could tell the truth. Then she placed the silk scrap on the table. Notice the mud stains, she said. Someone came from the garden. The window was latched from inside. Yet mud appears outside. The killer had to leave quickly and return unnoticed. The guests shifted uneasily. Eleanor could almost feel the guilty heartbeats in the room. Finally, she looked directly at one person. You made a mistake, and it was small. But it tells the whole story. Charles blinked. Violet gasped and covered her mouth. Lady Agatha's eyes widened. Eleanor smiled faintly. The truth will come out soon. One more slip, and we'll have it all. By setting this trap, Eleanor forced the killer to watch themselves. Every movement, every glance, every word became dangerous. And in that careful observation, the final piece of the puzzle was about to fall into place. Chapter 10: The Reveal. The drawing room was quiet, the afternoon sunlight breaking through the clouds. Eleanor stood before the gathered guests, holding the green silk scrap in one hand. Everyone here had a reason to want Sir Reginald dead, she began. Money, revenge, fear. But only one person acted, and left behind small, telltale mistakes. She laid out the clues. The locked study, no key could have come from outside. The mud on the windowsill, someone entered and left quickly. The scrap of green silk, torn from the killer's clothing. The brandy glass and the faint almond smell, misdirection to confuse us. She paused, letting her words sink in. The killer thought they could cover their tracks, but every move left a trail. Eleanor looked at each guest. The person who had access to the window, who was near the study late at night, and whose clothing matches this silk, is. She held up the scrap. Violet Sinclair. Violet gasped. No. I didn't. Eleanor shook her head. You did, Violet. You slipped into the study while Sir Reginald was distracted, used the gun at close range, and staged the scene to look like a locked room mystery. The mud, the silk, all clues you left in haste. Violet's shoulders slumped. I wanted to protect Lady Agatha, she whispered. I thought if Sir Reginald were gone, she would be safe from what he planned. Lady Agatha stepped forward, her eyes wide. Violet, you shouldn't have. Inspector Holt nodded. It's over now. We know the truth. Eleanor set the scrap down. This house is full of secrets. But the simplest mistakes always give the truth away. Violet made one, and that's all it took. The guests were silent for a moment, then slowly the tension eased. The storm had passed. The house, once alive with fear and suspicion, felt quieter now. Charles ran a hand through his hair. I can't believe it. All this over a mistake. Lady Agatha touched Eleanor's arm. Thank you. Without you, we might never have known. Eleanor smiled faintly. It's never luck, Lady Agatha. Observation and patience are all it takes. Outside, the sun broke fully through the clouds. The manor, tall and grey, seemed less menacing now. Eleanor knew that secrets always lingered, but at least for this weekend, justice had been served. And with that, the guests left Marlowe House, carrying with them the lessons of a weekend they would never forget.